or say?
This one, we had a few studies.
We're going to do a roll call.
So
as
they're
explained in the
very, they
pre-meeting.
know it really well, and there's no one
Yes.
here, so.
Barry Brinkner.
Cool.
I'm here, but it's Brickner.
Sorry, Brickner. Sorry, I'm just Dale Counigan.
Here.
Joe Manti.
Here.
Steve Simpson.
Here.
Simpson. John Treffelett.
Here.
Marisa Varga here. Danielle Ware.
Here.
And not present this evening is Kristen Aspinall and Tanji Grant.
Nicely done. Can I get approval of the agenda as published? So moved. Moved and
Second.
Moved and seconded.
We're not on TV, are
Moving up to Diane.
Very.
we? We should be.
Dale
We are.
and Joe.
Dale and Joe.
Dale and Joe.
Okay, all those in favor of approving that?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, next, I'm going to open the public hearing for zoning text amendment 5 of 2024. This is chapter 34, the zoning ordinance to add design standards recommended to city council, new section 34-5.20. Who is going to be talking? Are you going to be talking?
Yeah. So this is an amendment that we've talked about quite a bit. We had 2 study sessions, and we scheduled the public hearing at the last meeting. The intent of having design standards is really to set a baseline for quality, for the appearance of buildings, and to make sure that they're durable and easy materials to maintain and consistent with the aesthetic appearance that the city wants to see. The intent is not to overreach or overimpose and make it difficult to develop in Farmington Hills. So the ordinance seeks to strike kind of a balance of both flexibility while hitting that sort of baseline level. So the design standards start with an intent statement that kind of explains the reason for having the standards and goes into applicability to explain that all new construction has to apply, but that for expansions, it only applies when there's an increase of 50% or more in terms of floor area, indoor seating capacity, and it only applies to facades that are facing a public right-of-way, or oriented towards a public right-of-way, I should say. And when there's less than a 50% increase, they don't need to meet the standards of this section. There are exceptions for single and 2-family dwellings, and in the LI1 zoning district, it only applies on major thoroughfares. We've included a list of permitted primary and accent materials for buildings, and the primary materials are for 60% of the facade. One thing we talked about in the study sessions is that 60% is a pretty generous limit for primary materials. A lot of communities have like 75% requirements for primary materials, and that's a lot harder to hit. But 60% gives people quite a bit of flexibility for those accent materials to be included on the building. And next, we have standards, or we do allow waivers from the building material requirements with some findings in there for the Planning Commission to consider in granting that waiver. For the architectural scaling, this is just to say that there's no blank facades and looks at the different types of change and scaling that would be potentially used on the buildings. There is not an exception from this section, but again, it's only for facades that are facing a public right-of-way, and to have scaling on a building is pretty standard. I think one thing we talked about is some communities have requirements like these for walls of a certain length, but that didn't seem like the direction that Planning Commission wanted to go. For roofs, we have standards for flat roofs and pitched roofs, saying just basically that for flat roofs, you need to have a parapet that conceals any HVAC equipment, and for pitched roofs, we have a slope requirement, and that there's a waiver for that slope from the Planning Commission. And then there's also a thing about rooftop patios and terraces on structures 3 stories or higher, which prohibits them in the rear 35% of the lot depth to protect privacy of the neighboring lots. For the section on fenestration, there's a minimum ground floor fenestration and a minimum upper floor fenestration. And they're different based on buildings that are facing a major thoroughfare and buildings that are facing a public right-of-way that is not a major thoroughfare. And then there are some exceptions from the fenestration requirements for uses that require a little bit more privacy. One thing that we all discussed was, whether there were additional uses that needed to be added to this list, understanding that we don't want to offer a ton of flexibility with building materials, because then when you have a use change, it's kind of difficult to meet the requirements at that time, or you'll have a use change and they won't be meeting the requirements because they're not going to do any kind of construction. As far as entrances go, we removed the requirement for an entrance facing the front right-of-way and just have kind of standard requirements for entrance features. And that kind of, that concludes what we have here in the draft design standards. And happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Joe?
So in layman's terms, is it fair to say that this is an ordinance that's targeted at low-grade, super cheap construction and tries to limit or prohibit that?
I would say that's a fair assessment.
Okay. Thank you. My next question, there's no one here. So this is for the city planner, and that is, how was the notice sent out? I mean, the likely developers who might want to develop that are not here. So did the Chamber of Commerce get a notification? And I just want to make sure before it goes to the city council that there is an opportunity for the interested public to express themselves. That's all.
Yes, I don't know the answer to that as far as if it was,
And I don't care the answer. I just want to
Okay.
make sure that for the city council.
yes, I believe the notice went out as it would normally for a public hearing, but not necessarily to targeted groups.
And I'd probably, because there's nobody here and we are increasing the minimum cost, most likely, of developing here, that there be some targeted announcement. That's my input.
Dale?
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, Joe, I do care. I mean, in the past, there used to be a builders association in the city of Farmington Hills that we contacted when we had ordinance changes, Chamber of Commerce, anybody that would be interested in developing and representing building groups certainly should be notified. And it's a good opportunity here to have them here before they reach the city council meeting, so we can anticipate some of the questions. I do have a specific question as it relates to Article 4, building materials. D, samples of building materials may be requested by the zoning administrator. In our organization, who would the zoning administrator be? Would that be the zoning code enforcement officer? Would that be the city planner? Who would that be?
Yeah, code enforcement is our zoning administration. So, but the city planner works hand in hand with the zoning division.
So my question is, as it relates to materials, review of materials, we have a zoning administrator. I don't know anybody at the city has that title of zoning administrator. Is there now a zoning administrator?
What is the role that you typically have in the ordinance? We can change that.
Yeah, I wonder if you wanted the building official to see it, or the city planner,
Building.
City planner?
Probably city planner.
City planner? Okay.
That sounds good, yep.
Okay.
The city planner would be reviewing the facades for any kind of permits that come in to make sure they conform to the requirements.
Yeah, it was just a technical question. I wasn't familiar with that title, so yeah, city planner. Okay, thank you.
Any, Barry?
As long as we're getting picky, and 4C, said all building materials and colors shall be clearly labeled on the proposed building elevations. Wouldn't that be the building plan, elevation plans?
Sure. Yeah, we can add that. And
mean,
actually,
so-
that reminds me, I think, I'll make sure that if you guys have, information required for site plans in the ordinance, that this, it also lists elevations, but now I'm remembering that is in your general code and not in your zoning ordinance or something. I'll have to look at that, the site plan informational requirements, because I don't think you have building elevations currently required for site plans.
I think they are, but we can double check.
Yeah, okay.
Another one.
Yes, very.
Moving right along, in G, you have I and II about the waivers situations. And I really didn't see anything in here, and I know that this is included as a part of it, is when there's reconstruction going on, or they might be doing additions to buildings and things like that. Normally, you'd want, we were talking in here about compatible with surrounding developments, but we don't have anything in here where a building that's being reconstructed or being added onto, you would assume that whatever they used before would be allowable for the addition or the reconstruction. And so I'm proposing that we add a triple I there, that the, let's see, I can't even read my own handwriting. The building materials are the same, the proposed building materials are the same as the existing building materials on an addition to an existing building. So what I'm trying to say is we don't have an exception for that. If they already have a half a building up and you're putting another half of the building up next to it, you should be allowed to use the same materials you had on the first half of the building, but we don't have that exception in this ordinance.
So I think that what this ordinance says is that if you're expanding more than 50%, you have to bring that whole facade into compliance.
If you're
So
doing,
you wouldn't match it to the existing part of the facade because you're bringing the existing portion of the facade that's visible from the right-of-way into compliance with this section.
okay, but the thing is, if you also have a separate provision dealing if it was less than 50%.
Right.
I just want to be I don't want to be in a situation where someone's trying to make an addition to a building, and then you tell them, well, you can't use that material anymore because it's in the other part of the ordinance. There should be an exception to just additions to the building so that everything matches.
You don't think item number 1 would cover that? Specific architectural objective or purpose? Match what you have?
I mean, if you want to fit it in there, that's fine. I just don't want people to be stuck in a position where, oh, you're going to do 45%, but I don't like the material you used before, so you can't use it for the rest of your building. You got to redo your whole building.
If they're doing less than 50%, they don't have to comply with, they're exempted from this section altogether.
Okay, well, I
And
mean, I
then if
don't
they're
like
more
the
than
idea of
50%,
you
they have to bring the whole thing into compliance. So there's no like middle ground where they'd match it to what's existing.
Yeah, but the
if that
thing is,
makes sense.
I don't want the people that are trying to redo a building in our town have to redo the whole building because you go over 50%. If you're just making an addition to the building, it should be able to match the other half of the building. Because then what you're basically saying is we can stop you from redeveloping your own building because you're using material I don't want to see anymore. That should be an exception. If Tom Schultz thinks that the I provision takes care of that, that's fine.
I have a question.
Yes.
So where Barry is speaking, 2II, it specifically says that only the new or modified design elements are required for compliance for less than 50%. So what Barry is saying is, yeah, but why should they have to do that? Because now it's going to, it'll be a building material mismatch on 100% of the building. He's saying they should be able to be, they should be exempt from having to use the new compliant material.
I guess, I think what the intent of the ordinance is if it's over 50%, 100% of the facade, including the part that existed, has to be upgraded. So they have to upgrade what's existing. They can't match what's new to what's existing because that would be a downgrade of what's new. Then you're not really achieving, you know, the idea of large investment has to meet the new building material
Absolutely.
standards.
What you're saying is you disagree. You disagree with what Barry is fundamentally saying, that there should be an exemption for buildings that have less than 50% change. They shouldn't have to have a mismatched material on the building.
I'm not saying I disagree, I'm just saying that's not what it says here.
Oh, okay,
So-
fair enough. So do y'all want to put that in?
Yeah, do you guys want it if,
That's fair.
I guess, that would be no, you don't need to bring existing portions of the building into compliance when there's an expansion. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
He's specifically saying, can there be an exemption so that they don't have to come into compliance at all? They can add the 42% new building and use the original building materials that may or may not be in compliance.
Well, actually, what I was saying, that's already in there on the 50% or lower. The question is, if you go over 50%, this ordinance might require them to tear down their whole facade on the outside and not match by adding on, which I think will be a stopping of them redoing a building or expanding their building because they might not want to change the rest of the building. I don't know that that's not, I mean, it's got, the way it stands now, the way this ordinance is written, is it has to be in compliance with other surrounding areas, but surrounding buildings, as long as it does that. But we should have an exemption if it meets its own standards from before. I just don't want to make people that want to expand a building in our town have to go tear down their facade just to make this ordinance happen.
So, Mr. Chair, can I?
Yes.
So and I guess I just want to make sure we're reading it the same way. So if you look at the first page of the ordinance, right? At the bottom of the first page is the requirement that the planner's talking about. So first of all, it applies to all new construction, but the intent for Mr. Brickner's point was to make it applicable, generally require people to, in fact, remove the old facade and make it match if you're doing more than 50%. That's what we talked about. That's why the ordinance is written that clearly to require that. So that's what I, or Romanet 1 says. But if you go to the next page, I think it kind of answers Barry's question, what if it's 45%? And, you know, as we were hearing, when it's less than 50%, only the newer modified design elements are required to be compliant. So that's the general rule, and that I think was carefully explained, and instead of just saying new construction, you agreed, well, let's try and fix some old bad-looking stuff too. But then you can go on, and when you get to the building material section, that's the waiver provision that Barry was saying, and when you look at that facade, I think this waiver applies. You can say, you know what, on this building, we don't want to require that. We think it's fine the way they're proposing it. So this is a general, as I read it, a general exception that would allow for what Barry's comment is. If you don't think number one is clear enough for the matching, we can make that clearer. But I think that's the general intent of this language, which is if you think it makes sense to just waive it and allow them to use the old building material for the new section, this would allow you to do that if you see it and you accept it. So we can clarify it, but that's the intent, that this is the waiver for that material issue.
It's already built in, that's what I was trying.
Yeah, but
As long as
if
we
it
have-
wasn't clear enough, we should maybe tweak the language.
I don't want to waive it. I'm sticking to layman's terms. Basically, if the building is, you know, a piece of junk,
And you don't want,
right? If it is lower grade material, we're setting a minimum bar. And then if you say you're gonna triple or quadruple the size, if you use this exemption, then you can make it a super big, low-class building. And I don't think that's why we're here. Okay? Now, if, as I understand the way you just explained it, if we just leave it the way it is, even though it's really cheap construction, we sort of like it, we could go ahead and let them get away with it. right? So I don't want to codify it that you're exempt, period. You know, overall, a blanket exemption.
We have to make a.
I do not want to do
But
that. I like it the way it is.
Dale?
Dale?
Yeah, relative to the section on roofs, so right now, talk about flat roofs and parapets and concealing HVAC units and whatever. Is that currently in our ordinance now?
I thought it was.
Yeah, it is in your
Is
schedule
this-
of your notes to regulations says that mechanical units need to be screened, but it
Right.
doesn't say that it needs to be screened by a parapet, but I think that's kind of obvious, so maybe
Yeah,
not necessary here to be redundant.
seems to be redundant. I mean, so we require screening, not necessarily by the parapet itself, but by a screening material, right? That's as I understand ordinance. Is this in conflict with what, or is this confusing what our ordinance is? You know what I mean? Is this language necessary, or is it already understood? It's got to be screened.
I agree with you that it's redundant and could be removed, but there is a second part of the sentence that says that parapets shall not exceed 1/3 of the height of the supporting wall at any point, and that does fall more into like the design standards category.
For
than
this.
that intent of screening. Would you guys like to remove the part about the rooftop equipment and keep the part about the 1/3?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't, so the parapet should conceal the HVAC units. So that's really not what an ordinance says. It can be, we could have a parapet, right? But you have screening material around it. You could have actually a structure around the HVAC on top of the roof that in fact screens the HVAC.
Right, that's permitted right now. So if you want it to be required to be a parapet,
No, I'm not suggesting that.
okay, so then we should get rid of the first sentence.
Yeah, well,
keep the
yeah,
second
it
sentence.
just confuses what our ordinance says.
Yep, I understand that. That makes sense.
Okay. And to Joe's point about materials, I mean, you can have, and this is where I probably have a philosophical difference with the majority of you. You could have a building that has the desired materials that can be blighted and an eyesore in the community. And you could have a building that has so-called undesirable materials that is well-kept and maintained or whatever. So just because you have certain materials that we've designated in this ordinance as desirable doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to have a blighted building. So that doesn't necessarily answer the question. And to go back to our earlier discussion, my concern is when you have businesses that have limited margins to invest and improve on their property, I don't want to discourage them by requiring them to expend additional resources, limited resources they may or may not have to do an improvement when they could use other materials that are accepted by code and are acceptably and widely used in our community, and require them to go to additional expense to make an improvement because the ordinance says so.
But that's why you built the waiver in for materials, which is gonna be the most
So
expensive.
if we leave it as it is, there's a waiver
There's
that
an
we
option,
can case by case use.
yes.
And I'm saying just leave the waiver, don't make it an automatic thing.
My only point is, I don't necessarily know if I want to be the person or on a board that has to grant that waiver.
And
It needs to grant a waiver.
I don't either, because you and I have no sense of aesthetics, and that's why we're relying on all these
Go.
other commissioners.
Bingo. You got right to the point. No messing around. Okay.
No, but they're gonna come forward and bring their reasoning, right? Like, they're gonna say, this impedes my financial ability to make improvements to the building. It's not necessarily you deciding on aesthetics, is their business case or their business reasons to what they're trying to do and whether it makes or breaks their development. So that'll be a conversation.
But, I mean, not everything belongs, comes to the planning commission. I mean, a lot of maintenance or improvements to facades would be a simple building permit to the building department, and the permit would be issued. It does require extensive review. So my concern is not to discourage the general maintenance you'd have of people making improvements to keep their building looking the same, and that now we have to require that they have to come in and see us because the facade over 50% is now changed, and that kicks in all different kind of regulations, materials that have to be used.
The minute you're talking about,
We should know what we're doing if we pass an ordinance.
the minute you're talking about over 50%, it seems to me that you're not talking about regular maintenance.
Yeah. Be a significant investment.
Well, I mean, that will certainly be the call of the zoning administrator, whoever makes that call and makes that determination before it comes to us. And I know how it works.
I know you know.
So I'm just saying, that will be authority will be given to us, and we want to make that call.
Barry.
And one last thing I didn't get in. This is in 8E. You have the entryway features such as planters, benches, or other pedestrian-friendly amenities are encouraged. Can we add to that after benches, exterior artwork based upon our discussions today? We could have it built in already, and it would be an encouragement for them to do exterior artwork by their entranceways. It would say, it would change to entryway features such as planters, benches, exterior artwork, or other pedestrian-friendly amenities. Would anybody go along with that?
Yes?
I think I'm sort of ready to make a motion.
Okay, well, let me, if you're done.
Oh, I thought we already opened. I thought you started by opening.
No,
them.
I think with the staff, I don't think we actually opened the public hearing, did we?
No.
I'm sorry.
With the staff and then,
Okay.
these are staff questions, back and forth.
Yes. Okay.
So the public meeting is now closed?
Well, there's no public here, so.
I know, but as a formality, I want to make sure we do everything right.
Open it,
Okay.
open the public hearing, seeing none. Close the
What
public
about the
hearing.
invisible guy sitting right there?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Harvey.
All right, I'll open the public hearing,
Okay, okay.
and seeing no one from the public here, I will close the public meeting. All right,
Well done.
we got all the buttons pushed?
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Now can I make a motion?
Sure.
I hope you guys are ready.
You have this, you have the sheet here, don't you?
Well,
With everything
I
we
think
just
it's
discussed.
printed big enough for me to read.
Okay, well, that's,
And so I move to recommend to City Council that zoning text amendment number 5, 2024 be approved with the following recommended revisions, and who is keeping track of all of those? Please, go ahead and read them off.
I honestly, the only revision that I have is the exterior artwork.
Oh, we had the city planner.
Oh,
as the-
city planner instead of zoning
And
administrator.
we just deleted the one sentence regarding the parapet that confuses our regulation.
Oh, right, that's crossed off. I didn't notice that I
City
crossed it off.
planner,
Okay.
And then
parapet.
4C was going to change to elevation plans instead of building elevations. It's all building materials and colors shall be clearly labeled on the proposed building elevation plans.
Yes, I just wrote that into the Word document instead of commenting it, so I didn't highlight it for myself. But now I am.
That's okay. Our usual person is not here today, and now we all know how much we appreciate her.
Cheryl, right.
Second Joe's.
Steve, second. Do we have to vote on this by roll call? Is that what?
Wait, can we have the motion repeated with the items to be added? So we have a 4C.
Okay, you have,
One second.
I'll do it. 4C, you're adding the word plans at the end of 4C, and you're
Okay.
taking the S off. It'll be elevation plans, okay?
Okay,
4D, you're going to put, instead of zoning administrator, put city planner. Okay? And I think the only other revision was on,
6A1, roof.
Remove the sign after.
oh yeah, 6A1, Dale, that's Dale's.
The sentence after
first
flat roofs.
After flat roof.
Yep.
And then the last one was on 8E, and you're going to add after the word benches, exterior artwork.
And that's my motion.
all those in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say same sign.
No,
who's second?
Okay, Dale's no.
Dale second?
I'm a no.
No, she wants to know who seconded the
Steve.
motion.
I
Mr.
seconded
Stimson.
it,
Second.
Steve.
And Dale was a no vote. Okay.
Okay, next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from May 15th, regular and special meetings.
I move for the approval of the May 15th, 2025 regular and special meeting minutes.
Motion,
Second.
That's Barry Brickner.
okay, a motion by Brickner and second by Ware.
Danielle?
That's her last name. Ware?
I'm here.
All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Public comments. As previously stated, there's no public here. So we'll pass that. Commissioner or staff comments. Barry.
I would like to make comments and warning for all those that might try to travel down Orchard Lake Road between 12 Mile and 13 Mile. As it stands right now, there's a barricade about halfway up because they tore out the road to put a sewer in. And people were using the private road along the
Marginal
Orchard
access.
Lake Road to bypass it, which one would expect that's what it's there for. But when they were doing some of the constructions, they knocked a tree down and it covers the road, so you can't get through over there. And the Farmington Hills Police were nice enough to give people tickets that were trying to get around it. So if you can avoid going down Orchard Lake Road, at least for the rest of this week, I would do so, and you can go up 13 Mile or 12 Mile to get around it, unless you really know what you're doing. And then next week, starting on the 23rd, they're going to be starting reconstruction of Orchard Lake Road between 13 Mile down to the expressway. And they're going to be doing the curbs and gutters first, where there's some bad curbing, they'll replace it. And then they're going to do what they lovingly call a mill and fill, where they're going to grind down the surface about 3 inches or so and recover it with asphalt. Also, they're planning on adding double left-hand lanes on both ways on 12 Mile Road, facing each other. And I guess they're going to be changing the lights at Orchard Lake and 12 and at the one at 12 and a half. So if you can avoid going through there, I would suggest you do that. For those of us that actually work in that area, it's not fun. And if you do try to bypass some of the things there, the police are handing out tickets for people that are trying to bypass the barricades and get around. So just avoid the whole area if you don't have to be there. And it's fun to watch people coming down, turning around, going back out again. So save the gas.
Okay, anything else? Thank you. Okay, any other comments, commissioners? Motion to adjourn.
I motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Brickner seconded. Ware made the motion? Danielle? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Okay, I got you out of here at 8:05.
What's our next meeting?